We are now going to take you on a journey, a climate change journey through the power of narrative with award-winning performance storyteller Mara Menzies.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I hope that you can all hear me okay. And I am very, very happy to be here and be able to share this story with you. Stories are such a powerful way of being able to explore and express so many different things that affect us in the world today. And this particular story is a very, very old story. And it's a story that I heard from a storyteller about 10 years ago, but it's such an important and relevant story for everything that is taking place right now. And it's a story of a king. And this king was a good king. And the things that made him a good king is that every single action that he took, he did with the very best intentions of his people at heart. They recognized this. They knew that when the king asked for the forest to be felled, he knew that he would plant. They knew that he would plant trees. They knew that when the king asked them to stop taking so many fish from the rivers, they knew it was because they needed a season, a period for the fish to reproduce and regain in numbers. They knew that whenever the king asked them to stop building so fast and so many houses, it was because that they needed time for the land to regenerate itself. So laws were passed and the kingdom prospered. And one day, this king fell asleep, and when he woke up in the morning, he found a gift on the end of his bed. It was a box, and it had been wrapped up with brown paper. And when he had taken all the paper off and he saw this box, he saw how crystal clear it was. It was a glass box, the most beautiful, the most perfect, the most precious glass box in existence. He picked it up very carefully, and he could see all the way through it. He placed it down on a little table, and for a moment, he could hardly see anything at all. The glass was so clear. But this box was a very special box, because when the king opened up that lid, when he put his hand inside that box, whatever he wanted, he could pull out. However, in all of these stories, there must be a condition. And of course, this box had a condition too. Whenever you took something out of this box, you had to put something back in. Now, the king understood this, and he knew that this box could very easily be misused. And so he decided that he would hardly ever use it. He would only draw on it whenever he needed it, whenever there was no other option, because he knew that he could become very dependent on taking things from the box. And so that little box sat in the king's chamber on a little wooden table at the end of his bed. And the years rolled on, and the kingdom continued to prosper. The rivers were crystal clear, the forests grew tall and thick and green. The vegetables were the envy of the neighboring kingdoms. And because the people were respected, the kingdoms around them also respected them. They said, if these people can live in peace and are able to support and help each other, that must be a very, very good way to live. They admired and envied the peace of this kingdom. And so they decided that they would ask the king for help. And so the king was summoned away. He jumped onto his horses and pakatang, 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 pakatang. He rode and he rode and he crossed the rivers, the mountains, the forests, the plains, and off to help the kingdoms on the other side. But while he was gone, there were robbers, 3 robbers who were brothers, and they had heard of this glass box. And when they thought of all the things that they could pull out of it, they were consumed with desire. They wanted to long and own and possess this box. And so they leapt onto their horses, they rode towards the king's palace, and they situated themselves right at the bottom. They pulled out enormous ropes from their bags, they twirled them round and threw them up to the turrets where they caught fast, and they started to climb higher and higher and higher and higher. They jumped over the walls into the palace, and the three brothers started to look around for this box. They searched everywhere. They started off in the kitchens and they opened up the drawers. They climbed up onto the topmost shelves. They searched underneath the tables. They checked behind the curtains. They searched everywhere, but there was no box to be found. They went into the living areas of the palace and they searched everywhere, underneath the chairs, under the tables, behind the cupboards, every single place. They searched and there was no sign of the box. They saw that the moon was passing across the sky and they realized that they needed to leave. And in great frustration and anger that they had failed to find that box, one of the brothers kicked over a little wooden table in the king's chamber. And he heard, there was a sound of something hitting the floor. And he realized that this was the glass box. And so he picked it up. And yes, it was the box. He wrapped it up. He called his brothers. They headed over to the walls. They climbed down those ropes. They jumped onto their horses. And pakatang, 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 they rode off across the plains. Now, when they reached a forest, they had built a little log cabin inside, and they headed into the cabin and they started to open up that box. And the first brother, he pushed his brothers out of the way. He was the oldest. He was going first. He put in his hand and he said, I want 10 gold coins. And when he pulled his hand out, the sparkle, the gleam, it filled the little cottage. His eyes widened. He couldn't believe it. They were beautiful. The second brother pushed his older brother out of the way and said, it's my turn. And he put his hand into the box and he asked for a sword encrusted with beautiful jewels. And when his hand came out, there it was, perfectly designed to fit his own hand. It sparkled, emeralds, rubies, diamonds, sapphires. It was beautiful. And the third brother, he put his hand in. How can I outdo my brothers? He thought to himself. He reached his hand in and he asked for a diamond as big as his head. There it was. Its light filled the room. And the first brother thought, all I have are 10 silly gold coins. And my second brother, my younger brother, has got a sword encrusted with jewels. And my third brother, the youngest, has a diamond as big as his head, a beautiful diamond. I want something else. He pushed them out of the way. He put his hand inside and he asked for, I shall leave you to imagine what the brother asked for. He began to pull out the most magnificent item. If you can imagine what your greatest, deepest desires are, these brothers, they were desperately trying to outdo each other. They pulled out the most exquisite, the most rare, the most precious, the most audacious, the most wonderful, the most everything out of this box. And the little log cabin was filling up with these magnificent treasures. The brothers couldn't get enough of it, but they were so consumed with outdoing each other that they forgot one important thing. Nobody thought of putting something back into the box. And so the little box, it did what it was supposed to do. It gave and it gave and it gave and it gave. But because it wasn't receiving anything back, it began to weaken and it began to tremble. It began to shake and shudder, and it kept on giving until it could not give anymore. And it shattered and it broke into 1,000 pieces and they spread out across the table. The brothers were outraged, horrified. They began to blame each other. It was your fault. You took too much. How could you do this? You kept on taking and taking and taking. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. And the accusations, they flew back and forth. And soon the brothers began to jostle each other. They began to push and heave, and they began to throw each other, punching and kicking. A war had broken out. And as they began to bounce across the room, they crashed into these towers of treasure and the treasure began to sway and sway, topple over, and pinned, crushed the brothers underneath all of that glittering weight. Meanwhile, the king had returned from his business across to the other kingdoms. And when he got home, he immediately saw that the glass box was missing. And he sent out messengers across the land, and they jumped on their horses and they rode across the rivers and the plains and the mountains. And one messenger found himself in a forest. And in the distance, he saw a little cabin, but there was a brilliant light emitting through the cracks in the walls. And he knew that he had found the glass box. He called the king, and the king sent an army. And the army of soldiers surrounded that little log cabin, and they called out, demanding that whoever was inside should come out. But of course, nobody responded. So the soldiers tried to push in the door, but there was so much weight it would not open. So they began to prise open the walls, ripping the planks of wood from the side of that cabin. And as they did, all of that beautiful treasure spilled out onto the forest floor. And when the soldiers went in, they saw the bodies of the three brothers trapped underneath all that beautiful treasure. And the messenger, he saw on the little table all that was left of the glass box. And he swept up those little fragments of glass. He put them into a little bag and he took them back to the king. And the king was heartbroken. But he took those pieces and he called the glass blower. And he said, "Glass blower, I have a job for you." And he handed over the bag. And 3 days later, the king summoned every single person in that kingdom. And he summoned the glass blower. And when everybody was gathered right there in the court, he took a box from the glass blower and he opened it up. And there inside, there was a sphere, a glass sphere made of all that remained of the glass box. And he took that sphere and he held it up and he put it right at the entrance to the kingdom. And he told every single person gathered there, "My brothers, my sisters, my friends, my family members, whenever you leave and whenever you return to this kingdom, I want you all to look up and I want you to see that glass sphere. May it remind you of that glass box that was so precious to us. May it remind you of our earth. We can take whatever we want from it. We can fulfill whatever desires we have, but we must always remember that we have to put something back in." And that is the story of the glass box. And I felt that it was really appropriate for today in so many different ways. I think that whenever we see the world and whenever we see all the things that we do to the world and all the things that we need from the world and what we take from the world, we must always begin to think to ourselves, what exactly are we putting back in? So I hope that you enjoyed that story and I hope that you took something from it. Thank you.